Okay. Well, hello YouTube and hello everyone, and welcome to this sixth session of the Transition Design Summer School. It will be another one of the sharing sessions, and much like the previous ones, it's been inspired by Cameron's very generous offer of teaching us transition design and seeing how we applied it to our processes as students at Masters in Service Design at University of the Arts, London. Today we're going to hear three projects from Dorcas, Damien, and Sarah in that order, and it will be a similar format. So you will have a roughly 25-minute slot each, into which you can put your presentation and get feedback. There is a feedback board set up on Miro, where feedback can be put asynchronously. As always, we will copy any links from the chat there. If you have any thoughts, feelings, suggestions, put them in the chat or in the Miro. Well, one way or the other, they will be incorporated into the process. I would also once again like to thank Cameron for volunteering his time to be here and his knowledge and wisdom. This would not be possible without him and, well, all of us really, but mostly him, but also some of us. Without any further ado, unless I forgot something, Damien, did I forget anything? Wonderful. I'd like to ask Dorcas to start the presentation. You are muted.
Thank you, Alex. Hello, everyone. I'm Dorcas. I'm from Hong Kong, and the current project I'm working on is also related to the Hong Kong community, and I'm mainly focusing on the groups of migrants currently relocated from Hong Kong to the UK. Let me click the share button first. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. This is a very short sharing because I'm in a phase of restructuring my project. Basically, my starting point is from the beginning. I arrived in the UK with a lot of in-depth conversations with people. I realized that a lot of people relocated to the UK, especially people are in more younger generations. They have difficulty to feel like here is their home. Although maybe they apply for the BNO visa, maybe they're already living here for more than 1 year, they still feel like rootedness. They don't know where they belong to. Meanwhile, I found there's a lot of organizations or self-initiated grassroots groups of people doing a lot of civil engagement works, and those people who are more engaging with the community, actually they have much stronger bonding and also have a very beautiful connections with the rest of the community of the UK, which make me feel so fascinated to see, and it's really beautiful to see how people work very hard to integrate themselves into the society, not being forced, but by their own desire, which synchronize with what we have already discussed in the past few weeks about the theory for magnets. I think this is one of the trigger points that makes me reflect on actually what kind of things migrant can do, and also about the positions of migrant. It is someone who take resources from the society, or actually migrants also can contribute to have a sense of being a citizens. So this is my starting point of thinking about how to phrase this project. And I start looking with different kind of organizations. For example, churches, community center that's established by the council, and also some kind of more small initiative groups. They are all providing different kind of service for Hong Kongers. However, at the same time, I realize there's lots of migrants, they just relocated to the UK. Actually, they didn't know this very beautiful network that is happening. And I'm curious about why. And also there is some kind of research is kind of synchronized with what I have found. Actually, maybe there need to have some kind of gate to let people just arrive to know what is happening and what kind of opportunity that they can find within the community to start doing something, because people may have different level of civil engagement maturity. So this is something that I'm interested to discover more about. And meanwhile, another thing is organization transition. There is a lot of organization currently is more focusing on the needs of the Hong Kong community. And I'm imagining what if those community could also connect with the rest of the community, which will increase the diversity of the cultural exchange, and also could benefits for the sustainable of the civil society. Yeah, this is about my project. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. I don't know. I never quite worked out the relationship between now I can't remember her name, and the refugee transition network. That initiative, I thought it had something to do with UAL, and the woman who was running it was in our first session here. It's terrible, I can't remember her name. Male, yes, sorry, yes. So I don't know how many of you were involved in that event she held just the other day with Terry and myself. Did some of you see that? Anyway, it was incredibly interesting for me. I learnt a lot, and I was thinking about the role of transition design in relation to something like refugee transition network, and just all the incredible things that were being shared at that session by the network of people around the world who are working with refugees in lots of different countries, Indonesia, UK, Europe, all over, America, North America, Canada. It was quite amazing. One of the insights I kind of had was that a lot of the antagonism sometimes between host country residents and people who are refugees is kind of this idea that they are different from us. And one of the things that I just sort of glimpsed when we were having that discussion the other night was the importance of recognizing that in a situation like climate change or something like that, everyone is in some senses migrating to a new place. Even if you stay in place, your climatic condition is changing. Now, you don't want to sort of reduce the lived experience of someone who's a refugee, clearly fleeing political persecution, by saying we're all refugees. That's a terrible thing to say. But that's precisely why you can start to transition design services in which the services are not only for refugees, they're not only for recent arrivals. There is a way in which service designing a service for anybody engaged with a government service can be done in such a way that the service is there to help us all with some kind of new acculturation, some new acclimatization, getting used to new systems and services. So it becomes almost like the transition design strategy would be some wider theme governing the way in which services happen, so that it doesn't feel like this is a service that's got a very particular look and feel for refugees, but instead the way in which refugee services happen are the way in which all services happen, or at least some, or something like that. So I started to realize that was one of those examples that I tried to give when we were talking about systems, that if you work on something over here while doing something over here, the fact that both of them are being done in the same way, creating the same service patterns, just might mean that they link and create some phase change in the system. So that's my first quick comment. My second comment goes to what is particular about government service design in general, which is this weird thing where, because the service is provided by a government and therefore primarily provided to citizens, to people of the nation who have some certificate for being the people in that country, it's almost necessary that they chauvinistically presume you know the cultural expectations of government here. So it's like government service design, almost by design, has to assume you know how to relate to government because you're a citizen, and only citizens would know this. So it's very difficult, I think, sometimes for government service design to recognise that there are people interacting with the government who don't have the same cultural expectations of government, who come from countries where the government's more or less authoritarian, more or less demanding of hierarchy, more or less tolerant of error, more or less there to help you or have an expectation of mutual obligation or something like that. So one of the things that I think is interesting about the context you're working in is this kind of, if you come from one system and you've come to another, and that system is now trying to help you, does that sometimes feel uncomfortable? Does that sometimes feel unexpected? How long does it take you to learn not just how to use the service, but to understand the culture of the service, which I think government service design often doesn't explicitly teach because it has to presume you know that. So that's one issue. And then the third thing that occurred to me is, which I didn't kind of understand exactly, and so it's a bit of a question. So you talked about the networks of, I think, Hong Kongers in the UK when they arrive there, and that is a strong social capital, and that they're not aware of it so much. Is that what you were saying? That original new arrivals aren't aware of it, or?
I think the organizations, some of them is because of the phenomenon of this like large number of arrival and then start initiating like new groups, although there's already like existing different kind of community groups. The difficulty that I found is like individual have different level of like experience in civil engagement, and also some people may have the desire to be more involved in it, but maybe they didn't even know they exist. Like for example, myself, because of the project, I started doing research, attending activities, talk with people, and some people will introduce, oh, do you know about this organization or that event? And it's amazing to see the power of people, but at the same time, okay, imagine someone is busy, they're like struggling with finding jobs or opportunities. Actually, they don't really have time to, maybe they have time to involve in community work, but they don't really have time to connect with that amounts of people in order to get the informations. So that is just going,
Right. Okay. So I understand. I did a project here, and it was to do with bank scamming, and someone was describing a recent arrival from Central America and coming to realize by talking to people from that community how important one particular local church was. So I hadn't thought about that, but there was obviously a strong religious community from that particular Central American country here. And once that person found that, even though they themselves were not a church goer, but once they found that community, that community gave them so much knowledge about how to actually negotiate banks. In that case, we were doing this exploration of banks. And so that, what gets called bridging social capital, that there's a group, and then the group doesn't only provide the assistance of what it is, in this case, kind of religious solidarity. So it looks like it's all about religion, but in fact, it's a great way to learn something about the banking system in Australia because of that. So I think this is a really important sort of thing to think. And it's that same idea that you're trying to find a community here. But the challenge, I think, one of the things to be wary of is at its worst, a kind of re-ghettoization of the recent arrivals, of kind of the whole point is to try and allow some kind of integration, not assimilation, but some kind of integration with the new community. And you need members of your community who can act as bridging social capital, but that can also mean that you spend all your time with your own community here. And so how to kind of make sure that there is some cross-cultural integrations as well. And again, you've got to find literally then overlaps. So it might be that the church community goes and runs a local food fair, and at the food fair there are many other communities, and so now there's an overlap between the original community that was helping you do the bridging and other communities. So looking for those so it's almost like in your diagram, I'd want to see some of those Venn diagram overlaps to say this church provides information about banking and how to negotiate the government, but also introduces them to other communities from other countries who are also going through the same refugee process at the same time. I was just thinking that, particularly when you had the churches there, remembering this story about this Central American refugee community, or migrant community, not refugee here. But I just hadn't kind of realised how important the church was going to be as a way of communicating to these people risks of scamming.
Thank you so much.
I'm currently working with a few local authorities, and I found what you were talking about with service design, kind of by design being always tailored to a particular culture, to be actually quite telling, because also like cultures within a country are not homogeneous either. And particularly here, there's just a strong subset of society which is clearly engaged with local and national government, and a large swathes that don't. And there is like a bit of a vicious cycle of services being built for people who talk to local council, kind of, and not really working for anyone else. Sorry.
No, it's a great point. I'll just ask this question. I don't know if anyone's seen any research. I keep looking for it. I really want to know what it's like to design a service, particularly a government service, in a country that has national service, that has conscription. So if you can guarantee that at least your male population of customers are people who are used to obeying orders and have literally been, like, I would imagine, compared to a country like where I live now, where it's sometimes difficult to tell people to do something, although Australians are incredibly compliant, as we discovered during COVID, to our benefit. But I'm always interested to know what difference it makes to service design in a country that has conscription and mandatory military service. I would imagine there would be differences, but I've never heard anybody describe it.
But wait, doesn't Australia have compulsory voting?
We do have compulsory voting. I mean literally army service, where you've got to go and serve for 2 years in the army. And so we have literally, you're used to people yelling at you and doing exactly what they say.
Yeah, we have that in Singapore, like, yeah, compulsory national service. And I actually never really thought about it, like whether there was a difference between how, I don't know, when you were saying this, I was just thinking, oh, was there a difference in how Singaporeans responded to COVID, like lockdowns and policies around that compared to other countries? And I feel like I don't know whether conscription really had a effect, but it feels like in Singapore, at least the culture of government services and citizenship, there's a kind of there's an obedience really, like there's a culture of like, yeah, okay, like we like they know what they're doing, we kind of trust them, but then also we don't really have any other choice.
It's definitely my
Yeah, it's
experience that
interesting.
half of what you're dealing with in America, often in particular states that are more in the middle than on the outside, is just such a distrust of government that when government arrives to do something to your benefit, you've got to do all this work to convince them that it's not a conspiracy, that it's not like, I just think often if you haven't kind of lived in North America, you just assume there's a level of trust in government. There might be a cynicism about its corruption and incompetence, particularly in the UK. But, you know, elsewhere, yeah, in North America, it can sometimes be quite tricky doing government service design.
Well, thank you very much. And on that wonderful note, I think we can move on to the next presentation, which will be Damien.
Hey, thank you. I have to say, so like I didn't originally plan to have my project as part of this, but as I the more I was involved in this and the more I was learning, I in just the past month decided to change my project topic to something that I realized I had a little bit more energy for. And so here I am wanting to do a project around transitions as well. Let me try and share my screen. Window. Hang on. It's not sharing yet, right?
No.
Mm.
If you send me the slides, then I can.
Okay. Okay, I'll try to just send you the slides. It's a link that I think should be easy to open. I'll send it in. It's a link in the chat right now. Thank you. Yeah. Are you able to open it? Wait, hello?
Alex, you're mute.
Sorry. Yes, it is just loading because it's in Figma.
Okay.
Give it a few seconds.
Thank you. Yeah. So I feel like I feel like I tried a really small thing in my project. And I don't know, I hope it's still interesting. Yeah. I can share. Oh. Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks, Aya. Okay, so yeah, I've decided to name my project Post-Capitalist Designers Fight Club. I realized the more I worked with this like summer school, I realized I had energy to wanna explore like supporting designers who want to use design for post-capitalist transition. Next slide, please. And the context of my, so I tried to next slide. Mixed as well. Thanks. I think I tried to this is a very incomplete and could be potentially incorrect view of like a step back and a look at a macro history of how design has always been intertwined with our social, economic, political systems in the world. Like for example, just in the last few decades, we've seen how like the rise of personal computers and smartphones has given way for a whole new field of design called UX design. And this has been the case like for the past hundreds of years. And I think even now we're seeing like we're seeing things like pluriversal design justice and transition design coming up, and it feels like we are as the limits and the harms of capitalism are becoming increasingly visible in the world today, it feels like we are at this point in time where design is in the midst of a transition to a system that's post-capitalism, that has quite deep roots into, like, for example, pluriversal design was inspired by the Zapatista movement. And I think it is within this context that I'd like to explore and try and see whether I could bring any kind of value. Next slide. So the challenge that I'm really interested in is, that's just an example of the different types of design that are sprouting up, like other than the big tree on the left that is current modern capitalist design, where we have design thinking and service design, etc., that is more object service oriented. I think there's a lot more like people centered, and then slowly moving toward earth centered and more ontologically oriented forms of design. So next. I'm really interested in designers who are in the middle of this sort of transition of design, who wants to next, designers who are feeling like dissatisfied with how design looks like today, that who are just dissatisfied with making something look pretty while the house is on fire. Next. I think designers who are moving from questions like this to questions like the lower one and next, and really designers who I think are facing a crisis of conscience as they deal with the tension or the paradox of, I want to design for post-capitalism, I want to design for more social and environmental justice, but next, on the other hand, can design really live outside of the commodity machine? Like, who can even afford to be critical? Because if I position myself as a designer who wants to design like for more social environmental justice, can I really find a job where I am? And so to explore this a little bit more next, what I did was to try and so this is the challenge that I'm interested in, like this sense of internal conflict. And to explore this more next, I tried to this is what I've done to try and explore the problem. I've done 2 online workshops where I used memes as a research method, and this is where most of the memes in my presentation comes from. I've done 12 interviews so far, and I have 8 more planned. And these are some of the job titles of the interviewees. And then I've tried to attend events where I feel like the post-capitalist designers are converging. Next. And I've brought all of that data into a grounded theory analysis. Next. And it is in this analysis process that I'm trying, that is where I attempted to use Max Neef's matrix of needs as a iteration of a code book for my analysis process. Next. I think at least for me, like the grounded theory process kind of just looks like breaking up my data into like excerpts, like highlights, and then grouping these excerpts into codes and trying to see like what comes out, like what kind of codes come up of like interesting groupings, and then to try to find connections between the codes, and then based on those connections try to find like core categories of these codes, and then from these core categories, like they're like, for me, like the starting point of a grounded theory. And then I repeat this every time I have new data, and I do like multiple versions of different code books. Like I might group things in a certain way one time, and then I'll put that aside and group things a different way and see what new codes come up. And I thought maybe it was in this process that I could try using Max Neef's like matrix of needs as a code book. So like, and I tried doing both the x-axis and the y-axis, using having and interacting as one code book, and then I tried using subsistence, protection, etc. As a different code book. And I think I found using the roles helpful in pulling out like insights from my data. So some of my insights sounds like next, realizing that there is like kind of very deep dissatisfaction about what constitutes meaningful and impactful work among post-capitalist designers. I think I've met people who don't feel this tension, who say that, yeah, I am doing impactful work when I can bring value to customers. But I think there are a group of designers who like are not happy with stopping there and who will go on to ask like, okay, but then what value and to who? Next. Is standing out in my data so far that it seems like, yeah, there's a privilege and requires quite a significant amount of investment of time and resources to be able to then define one's own practice, to choose the projects and to find the organizations where I can work within that aligns with my values as a designer. Next. And that because of this, because there's such a big time and resource investment required, like a lot of these designers who want to use design for post-capitalist transitions are perceived as early career, and this kind of like exacerbates the sense of aloneness in wanting like greater impact, even though the reality is that actually we're not alone in feeling this way. Like actually quite a lot of people feel this way, and there are a lot of communities that already exist around like this kind of work. But I think there are still quite a few designers that I've come across who feel a sense of like, oh, I'm alone in this, like facing this struggle, and it kind of adds to the internal conflict. Next. And I think this like because of this high motivation, I'm okay. This is where like I think using MaxNIF kind of like started to frame my insights a little bit. I'm noticing just how much my interviewees are talking about personal values and personal identity, and seeing that they see that their design practice and they're wanting to be a designer, to work within design, is very much related to how they see themselves in the world. And it's connected to like a sense of identity. And I think this causes them to be a lot more vulnerable or susceptible to burnout and disillusionment, similar to studies that have been done on social change makers or racial environmental justice activists, who are found to have like a higher likelihood of facing like burnout. Next. And I think this is this deep satisfaction that they feel, and intertwined with like a personal sense of like identity, that makes it really difficult for designers who are exploring this transition to find effective postures to communicate their values and to find ways to align their work more with the values they want to live up to in design. Yeah, and I guess okay, next. Next. So yeah, for me, like I guess underlying these things, these insights, I see that there is a connecting thread that feels like it's design practice as the work that I do in life. It seems to satisfy multiple needs, but in terms of identity needs, I think for designers who want to use design for post-capitalist transitions, the design practice, like our design practice, is seen as a satisfier for a lot of identity needs as well, and also like a little bit of understanding, being understanding. I understand it as like having a conscience or understanding my values or understanding my conscience, my morals, my boundaries. But then there's also the just who I see myself as in the world and how I like to live up to who I want to be. there's a strong sense of like identity coming up for me in my research, especially as I use MaxNeef to try and like analyze things. And so this is why next it kind of reminded me of what we're doing with this summer school, and it kind of led me to think next, what if like I compared this with like the transition design framework, because essentially it's a framework for also like transitioning design, like moving design from its very capitalist roots into something emergent, new, and like the next like system. And I feel like this thing that we're doing with each other in this summer school is a model on an example of a non-capitalist value exchange system where designers get to practice new theories, learn new theories of change, and to practice new ways of designing. And it led me to wonder, what if this model could also then be adapted to then include activities for envisioning pathways to transitions, and to especially learn new postures and new mindsets for doing post-capitalist design, especially in taking care of burnout, of taking care of how much energy there is among these designers. Next, and this is why it's leading me to consider perhaps a potential service could be next, like something like an open source blueprint for post-capitalist designers to quietly subvert capitalism wherever they are. I think because currently in the design industry, there's a lot of like companies that encourage their design teams to do like lunchtime sharings, to do like community activities, like organizing panel discussions and stuff like this. And I feel like maybe it's in these little spaces that exist within like modern design practice that we can slowly bring in like post-capitalist like this discourse, and try and like quietly in our own way subvert capitalism, and to even if we find ourselves like with no choice but to be employed within an organization that has like for-profit goals, we are still able to find a way to do and be a designer that wants more social environmental justice. Yeah, next. So this is just an example of what maybe a open source blueprint might look like. This is a activist handbook available online. It's almost like a wiki of strategies and resources for how to be an activist, how to do civil disobedience in a non-violent manner. And this is something that anyone can contribute to and edit. And I don't know, maybe if there is a post-capitalist design version of this, I wonder if it could be helpful. But I'm still in a very early days of exploring this direction. But yeah, this is my project so far, and how I've tried to use what I'm learning in transition design to explore it. Thank you. Thanks, Aya.
And Damien, it's fantastic. I definitely, on the one hand, like feel your stress at having kind of redirected and taken on something else to do, and then on the other hand, I think it strikes me as one of those moments when you suddenly realize, this is the prototype. Like, this isn't this thing I was doing on the side. This is the prototype. And as long as everybody else is happy for you to kind of use that in a way, I think it'd be really interesting and important to do that. So I'm excited to see it being picked up here. Just a bunch of random thoughts. It looks like you've come across Silvio LaRusso's work. Do you know him at all? Graphic designer. So, for example, he's both. Well, he's definitely someone who spends a lot of time memeing, and he's someone who spends a lot of time talking about cognitive dissonance, and his work is very beautiful in a very critical graphic design way. I don't know him so well. I hope he doesn't see this recording, but every now and then I'm kind of like, I'm not sure if he's an ally or an enemy, because he's so, and this is the exact issue that I think goes to one of the things you might be looking at, right? One of the things that's so frustrating about being a non-designer in design communities but trying to change design is I'm never quite up on the codes as to what is currently cool, right? So I'm just always like an outsider to these things, trying to read the memes and understand them. I remember I reacted to one of the guys who was doing a lot of memeing around design and capitalism on Twitter for a while, and then I saw later that he'd screenshotted something I'd put there, and he said, "Oh, look, the meme explainers have turned up," and I was just so ashamed. I just had to sort of run away, because the whole point, of these things is you must never explain them. If anyway, I didn't realize that because I thought my job was to be a teacher. Anyway, Silvio's kind of there, and the point I'm trying to make is, some of the people who have the most energy in design and are the most able to captivate a bunch of people around them to have a conversation are just doing horrible vilification of taste. Oh, we're doing that now. Oh, it's flat design. Oh, everyone's doing this now. Oh, it's all black. Design Twitter was a thing until Musk killed it, and it was a hideous thing, and it's kind of good if it's died. But it was always my dream, and I sort of saw it at the beginning of your presentation, to work out how can I get in with the cool guys but tell them that transition design is cool, right? How do you do that? And I'm just being stupid, but I think what I saw in your presentation, which I think is really interesting, is that what you were describing as identity and questions of style and in crowd and everything to do with kind of group dynamics, they have been crucial to design. Design is just a set of movements. It's the same as art. It gets its identity through expulsions, and it's been almost impossible for anybody who's ever thought about sustainable design to ever have any impact on that crowd. So just always the aesthetics were wrong. But there's this other thing that I just thought sensed the other day, which is so much of the community around sustainability and purpose sort of becomes so earnest, and I'm at risk of offending a lot of people here, but it's so earnest that I really miss kind of laconic, witty, acerbic design crit. It should be possible to say, I really believe in something and I'm trying to do it, but I also don't take myself too seriously about it, and I'm prepared to, so what I got from your presentation is you're trying to find both a service, which might be infrastructural, like the activist handbook, but in particular, you're also looking, I think, for the aesthetic of a service design that's going to work. So it's always interesting to ask, what are service design aesthetics? How does this service look and feel compared to this service's look and feel? And what are the things in the service that give it that look and feel? This one feels really customary, and this one feels really governmenty, and this one feels really like a dating app, and this one feels like it's really foodie, or this one feels like it's going to be a lot of work, but it's going to be worth it if I can just get in there. So I think it's really interesting to think about movement design, and definitely one of the big things that happened with transition design is that Terry Irwin, who is a highly respected aesthetic leader in the experience design community in North America, publicly committed to transition design, and then very clearly lent her exquisite Swiss typography training to giving it a look and feel. Now, it doesn't work, obviously, the aesthetic for a lot of people, but it sure looks more impressive and cleaner and designerly to a lot of design educators than a lot of what they pick up, which might be sustainable design. I think the danger is like circular economy is completely the opposite. Circular economy is just so slick in its kind of corporate imagery that it's lost any cynicism, or it doesn't have any academic quality at all. Anyway, I'm just rambling to say, it seemed to me like you were asking, what is the appropriate aesthetic of this service design for this post-capitalist group, in addition to what actually is the service? And that's the second set of comments I've got, which is, I would recommend don't be too enamored with the toolkit, handbook, platform. It's going to be a bunch of people. So then let me sort of end this ramble, which hasn't been exactly what I wanted to say, but say the thing that I have loved about this experience with you all is you're very clearly skilled service designers, because I made a stupid proposition and then you took me up on it, but it absolutely depended upon you just doing that little bit of work at the beginning, which I was totally incapable of doing, of saying, we're going to propose this as an arc of how it's going to happen, right? So that was amazing. Everyone then knew the roles they were going to play in this little summer school. So, but it was really light. Like you designed something that was robust enough, but not so robust that it looked intimidating. It was open. It allowed people to come in. It was just a really clever level of touch in what you created. That's the first thing. Secondly, on the other hand, it had nothing to do with what you designed and everything to do with who you all are, right? So what's become very apparent in the short time that we got to know each other is that you did all approach this with a genuineness and a real inquisitiveness that there were some interesting moments of risk management at the beginning. I remember a couple of questions like, what are you going to do with our ideas? And I was kind of like, are you guys actually going to turn up? And so there was this moment at the beginning, but again, you didn't shy away from the questions, and then you started showing up, and the showing up then modeled for a lot of people the showing up, and the whole thing kind of continued. So if you were going to look at this little experiment that you've done over the summer school, I would draw attention to what is the not over designed and under designed, what levels of behavior have to be modeled at the beginning to kind of get it flowing. And I think interestingly, like even some of like the early banter Alex and I had about films and the fact that I felt the license to start being a bit stupid with you guys and saying self-deprecating jokes that you probably didn't get. But, you know, even that, like that little moment there, like we settled into a rhythm saying, this is serious, but it's not too serious. And it's not merely a prototype. You're actually it's a process, like we said at the beginning, trust the process, like you have. So I think there's really interesting lessons there. In this little thing, and that banter is also part of what I go to right at the beginning, which is kind of Silvio's memeing, and you know, people like him are just so critical of the earnestness of post-capitalists. Poor Matthew Wazinski has written a post-capitalist book, and then Silvio's done a review of it, and it's just, but it's kind of like, yeah, I can see the dialogue, but it's a dialectic at the moment, and there's no sense of there being a really valid middle ground. And I think that's why I thought you're memeing and trying to find that aesthetic and identity. I think it's really good.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I didn't actually consider that the finding the visual I guess the how this looks like as part of supporting the transition as well. Yeah, I think it's really helpful to hear. Thank you.
Just one last thing quickly to say is, like I've been giving this talk on role stress recently. Also, I meant to say at the beginning, that thing that you identified at the beginning, I think is really important, that there are lots of people who are feeling stuck, but don't have the capacity to fully commit to an alternative economy, a totally purpose-driven, and at the moment, all they then get given is kind of cynical memeing.
Yeah.
And so there isn't kind of something. That's why I quite liked your idea that it's kind of like you're doing your day job, but this is a community in which you're going to continue learning and building solidarity to be another type of designer whenever you can.
Yeah. And this also reminding me of like I think when you describe like there's a group of designers who are the cool kids who get to say like, oh, this is good taste. I think it's also like it feels like this is in some form like colonialism as well. Like it's like there's a elite group of people that says like, okay, this is good taste. You can only use this kind of font, and these other fonts are like not good. And it's I think it's very connected to like, I think the biggest thing standing out from my research is like finding postures to be able to be more effective in like bringing these post-capitalist perspectives into my design practice. Yeah, and I'm just stuck on figuring that out. And yeah, I do like feel the like a tension around like I I I don't think I don't think a toolkit platform works well either, but I can't seem to break out of that habit of like, oh my god, okay, let me go do a toolkit or let me do a blueprint. Yeah. So I'm
But
still exploring that.
sorry, that reminds me of the last thing. What I was thinking when you were showing that was we need a dating app for people who are feeling role stress but don't want to be really earnestly committing to the other purpose-driven. And obviously it's not dating, but it's just kind of like in the way that we found ourselves and had really interesting conversations. So it's, it's a friend app. So it's literally kind of, the social network of people who you could possibly turn to at some point and say, look, I'm doing this at work. I'm feeling uncomfortable about it. What do you think I should do? Like, who's the person you could have that conversation to who isn't like a mentor or who isn't, you're not actually part of some. Anyway, those are the questions.
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Thank you both. I've now been sending memes in various channels inspired by the talk, which you can discover on Slack and vice versa. But without further ado, and this is actually going to be the last presentation of this format, which makes me weirdly nostalgic. It's going to be a presentation from Sarah, which I had the privilege of seeing yesterday, and it's wonderful.
Hi guys. First of all, thank you for this opportunity and to be able to like share this, and also to the two previous humans who shared their presentation. It was really inspiring. Okay, so let me just get started. I'm going to be sharing in like 3 different or 4 different channels of presentation because we're working on different kind of things. So let's just start. Okay. Okay, I seem to have forgotten how to share. Okay. Okay. All right. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So basically, for some reason, so my project is called Through the Looking Glass. So Lebanon 2050, exploring multiple preferable futures through decolonizing methods. We're the only country where those who are left behind feel homesick, as those who leave are the ones that make this country home. And this kind of, sorry, I'm a bit nervous. This kind of quote feels very relevant with the current reality of what's going on. So over 77% of young Lebanese have considered or actively considering to leave. And this mimics the third wave of mass immigration that Lebanon has gone through. And there's this predominant narrative that Lebanon is futureless. There's no hope. And if we want to have any kind of future, we must leave. And that's creating a lot of tension. And that's something that I personally relate to. When I started this master's, and what started this project as well was all of the comments I got about, oh, okay, you're not coming back, right? What are you going to come back and do for? So it kind of started with like, okay, we don't really have a choice. We're kind of almost forced to immigrate. And I kind of wanted to investigate that more. And the quote that I previously mentioned was shared through was part of a playback performance theater where almost 5, if not 6 stories of total people sharing their stories that evening, detailed tales of people, either finally relieved that they are, leaving the country, or of having left and being like, well, I waited to leave like everyone, but then when I left, I realized like this country that I'm in has no soul. Lebanon has a soul. And then someone detailing, saying the story of being left behind. So it was almost like a progression of people who are looking forward to leave or who are heartbroken to leave. Even that some of the actors were discussing how they're leaving, while some people who are who have left and sharing their experiences, or people who have been left behind. So someone sharing what it's like, how their home is now fragmented, and that they're considering leaving as well. So it kind of echoed a lot the reality. And then I kind of took an ethnographic research approach where I was just, at one point I became like a radar. Every time I would hear anything anywhere, and it was really everywhere. It's you can feel that in the atmosphere of like, when I was on the plane, I can hear people saying, I can't wait to land, or conversing with the person next to me. When I was leaving, I heard, we're like, I'm relieved to leave. When I was in taxi rides, someone mentioning how amazing this country is and that they had the opportunity to leave, but they didn't. In different coffee shops, and on the graffiti in the street, even while going on a hike. It's I attended a processing collective violence session as well, and this was part of a doctoral dissertation that was mapping out how people felt about Lebanon, and I will reference to that a little bit, how youth felt. So even in that conversation and what people are feeling and trying to name it was really interesting. And then sorry, I'm going to go through quickly everything, and then I'll dig deeper a little bit into each one. And I also went through a research through design process and an agile process where, rather than really using the double diamond, I was almost like giving myself a challenge every week and forcing myself to do some kind of activity every week. In order, that kind of failed quickly because I wasn't able to maintain it, but it was helpful to kind of always be like, okay, there's an idea, I want to test it, and let's see what that brings forward. And so there was a few mini workshops that were created, and I will dig deeper into those. There was a future literacy pilot that was created. And through all of this, I honestly felt like I was, Alice going through this wonderland, through the looking glass, where things felt familiar and not, because I was, I'm part of this community, but I was also a researcher. So kind of, and as I dig deeper, I realized how much I really don't know. And one of the first insights I got was that of Lebanon's temporality, and the fact that we actually see things in a form of cycle or a loop. So we have a very common saying, and I think everyone says it. I don't know if this is said outside, but we say time repeats itself, history repeats itself. And then this is a very almost satirical take on it. Like, I don't know, but our history, it always repeats itself, not sometimes. And jokingly, this particular person was saying it's almost as if it was punished to kind of like in the olden days where people would write the same kind of sentence, I will not misbehave, I will not misbehave. So almost like our history is doing the same sentence over and over again. And every time it tries to do something else, it ends up repeating itself. And even in the research while I was doing, the future of Lebanon is a never-ending story of strongly interlinked opposites attract. And when I dig deeper into the research, there was always this, I conducted a survey, and there was always this duality of like, oh, Lebanon will be the Switzerland, we will rise, the Switzerland of the East again, we will rise again, things will get better again. And then there's the other side of, well, things are only going to get worse. It's not going to get better. We're always going to end up repeating more and all of that. And this kind of made sense finally when I started looking at things in a more cyclical manner versus linear. And then there's this professor of history in the Middle East gave this talk about almost Frederick Jameson's temporality versus Ibn Khaldun's temporality. And even when we're saying in the language, a state is a definite endpoint versus dawla, which in its meaning is change, rotation, and flux. So in a way, we come to terms with the fact that there will be a high point for this state and there will be a low point, and that's okay. And looking at it in that way. And I sort of tried to map it, and I will try to zoom in a bit more into this map. And I'm not a historian, and it was really hard to try and kind of map the history of Lebanon because it was very, very consistent. So it's from a personal account of like, you know, the highs and lows, or how we hear them, so how things have happened. And it was kind of ironic to see that even in our highest moments, which were considered the idealized time of 1950s and 1960s, there was still like the threat of civil war happening. And so just kind of seeing how the cycle is happening and how sometimes we go up and how sometimes we go down, and seeing the potential right now where we can consider, like, for example, even in its lowest point for us in history, when we say 1975, it was still technically a high point because the war hadn't taken its full effect. There were even lower moments in that. So it just depends on what cycle we're looking at. And so right now, looking at 2020 and seeing how we can potentially vision things for the future, it can either go up, it can go down, it can go in any potential direction. And so that was something that I was trying to explore. And even looking at different systems, like in 2019, economically, we were at our lowest point, but because we were going through a revolution, our spirits and our hopes and our visions for the future were actually reaching a high point. And so just again, looking at what was going on and what system is high and what system is at its lowest, because there's no such thing as like a totality of something. But these are like small attempts at trying to do that. And even while trying to map things out, I wanted to also try to do a map within visual mapping and auditory mapping, but this is at its beginning and it's taking its time. And so this is a comic that details, I think, will become during the next tour, because we're always kind of predicting, okay, something else is going to happen. This was in 2006. Am I good on time, or did I talk too much?
You're good.
Okay. All right. So after this, my second insight was that Lebanon's past is a rabbit hole. And I really fell into that rabbit hole of trying to figure out what was happening within history. And this is something that I felt other members of my community were also trying to do, because there's a lot of current initiatives happening where we're trying to kind of discover our contested recent history. And there are a lot of movies, there are a lot of different artistic forms that are trying to make sense of it. However, because it's so contested and there are so many different narratives, how can we truly come up with a preferable future when we really don't understand our past and it's a bit jumbled? My third insight was while watching a few seminars that were happening that were trying to talk about the futures and the visions of Lebanon, they kind of also mentioned the concept of identity, and then this concept that is almost rooted in colonialism of being either or, and trying to kind of trace back into, okay, we're Phoenicians, no, we're Arabs, no, we're something. And then one of the speakers mentioning, well, we're all those things. We don't necessarily have to be either or. So also just kind of not embracing plurality, not embracing our very complex, rich history is one of the aspects. And also kind of trying to go so back in time to try and find our identity felt really interesting to me. My fourth insight was related to the language itself, the Arabic language, and the use in it in futures or even in daily life. And so this is a very famous Lebanese phrase. So hi, kifak, ça va, which, you know, is combining all three languages that a lot of the Lebanese people kind of very naturally interconnect when they're talking. And while here we do have plurality of language, and that's a really cool thing, and it gives us a lot of advantage, it's kind of sad because our natural language is receding. And I can see that even in myself when I'm trying to talk, and when I was preparing the materiality for the project, of like, okay, wow, I almost forgot how to write and articulate myself properly in Arabic. And I think we always think like the other language is better than our own. But then it's very interesting that so much of the words and terminologies don't really describe what we're trying to say. And so from, based on the previously mentioned PhD dissertation, there's like a glossary of terms related to what a lot of the Lebanese people are feeling. And when I was using the term hopelessness in the beginning, in my original proposal, it never felt quite right. And although people do say it and use it, however, when we're talking, it feels, especially in Arabic, it feels a little bit like, no, there's always hope, there's always amal. But the word ahbat was much more descriptive, and it's the feeling of defeat, of no ambition, or not drive. And so here was the idea of like, okay, these words are so much more descriptive in our language of what we're feeling, and somehow we're kind of losing that. And as I dug deeper into the future methods, I realized that it's very important to be using these words, because when we were playing these games, a lot of the times the words themselves would trigger imagery, and very much imagery based in the West rather than imagery that could potentially be based within our local context. So that was an interesting insight. And then that led me to ask, how might we create tools to explore preferable futures that utilize the Arabic language and tap into traditional ways and assets? And here I can talk a little bit more about the transition design and the process and the insights and how my process went. And so in the beginning of trying to kind of do my first mini workshop was about just testing out the tools. And it was about, okay, when I say the word future, what do you think? When I say future in Lebanon, what do you think? And when I talk about hope, what do you see? And using the thing from the future and how that can become more localized. And as I mentioned, like those terms, they kind of went away from Lebanon, and sometimes they were able to relate to that. And then based on this workshop, and based on something that Cameron, you and Male were talking about, which was, so in this workshop, I brought my bunch of tools and aspects. And I think you guys were mentioning that not to bring your walking box of tools and ticks and trips in order to do mapping. And so here I wanted to have the participants bring their own assets. And it was a remote workshop. So I asked them to participate by bringing in an entity or something that we were going to iterate this future visioning on. And it was kind of like a play on the thing from the future called Tape of the Future. And so it was terrain, arc, perspective, and entity. And it kind of linked to that and what they were doing. So that was very helpful. And throughout, I was doing informal WhatsApp questionnaires and actual questionnaires. And here kind of lies another thing that Cameron, you mentioned as well, was that when we were doing interviews, it's at the beginning or at the end when you're done asking people things where things really show up and where insights really show up. And it was when I was doing this questions with people over WhatsApp, someone said, that's really sad, or I feel really sad. Because up to that point, I was just asking people with one word, one emoji, how would you describe the future of Lebanon? And I was doing that through 3 temporalities. So the future of Lebanon in 2050, sorry, the future of Lebanon 2050, and then the future of the world, also to be able to compare and contrast what's going on and how the future looks different in each one. And when someone mentioned it, it made them feel sad. That kind of triggered of like, oh, okay, I should also be asking what people are feeling and how they're reflecting. And that helped me build the later survey that I conducted. And this is kind of me trying to understand what's going on with the survey and categorize it as Damien was doing, and asking at the end questions about what would motivate them to stay and leave. And then also trying to categorize that based on like basic needs, family, and how that would relate to the MaxNev table. And ironically, when thinking about how people, if people, when asked what motivate people to stay or what would change their minds to leave, it was pretty much contained with either family and family members and community, or obviously basic needs and rights. So that was an interesting insight. Ooh, sorry. And then based on all of those kind of endeavors and trials and errors, I also got to participate in a, got to like lead a workshop related to future literacy. And here again, it was the idea of the different systems happening together. So while they wanted to focus on the Arabic language, that was really kind of almost, at that point, I hadn't decided to focus on Arabic. I was more focused on like future tools, and I hadn't had that idea, but it was like, okay, this would be really interesting. We can test the tools, we can talk about that literacy. And if I'm working on this parallel system, because they're working on education and Arabic, it could really help and kind of inform my practice and vice versa. And so when creating this workshop, it was about taking all of what we've been learning and kind of combining them and trying to make it a lot more local. And so in the beginning, it was about kind of creating, the workshop was divided into creating alignment in the beginning about the concept of futures. And here it was interesting when I removed the concept of country, a lot of the people, when they were thinking of futures, they were thinking of their personal futures. So there wasn't a theme or a goal. So that was interesting. And it created for a much more diverse human need matrix kind of dispersing, rather than things being very specific. Yeah, so they just went through these different processes of horizon scanning and kind of building a service in the future. And what I wanted to bank here on is also the tradition of telling stories. So the end assignment was not to create a story or whatever. It was to create a 1-minute pitch, but for it to be done in an oral presentation kind of format. And I think that really, I could see the people's different kind of level of engagement and how everyone was going to a corner and how it made it so much more interactive. So that was a big learning. Finally, for the next steps, I'm kind of at a place where I can either continue working with this particular entity as they want to continue exploring future literacy, especially within the topic of Arabic language. And they want to do, we want to do like 3 extra sessions. So this was a pilot done with the team members. The next sessions would be to create like sessions with teachers and have them engage with future activities. And then the next session is them having, giving them more theoretical approach so that they can adopt these tools and use them within their own teaching and practice. And the third workshop would be with students as well. And all of that implicitly creating visions of the future as well, visions of the future for the Arabic language. Or I might shift a little bit, or it might not really relate to the project, but it's still going to happen somehow, and kind of exploring more science fiction and design literacy as ways of sense making and coping with realities and what's going on with Lebanon. And yeah, I think that's it. I hope that wasn't too much for everyone.
It's an incredible amount of work and incredibly interesting, and just to kind of register the overall affect, which is almost what you began with, which is something I've encountered previously, which is just that incredible love of Lebanon by people who have felt the need to leave. Like I think there is something kind of quite unique about the fact that the people leave, obviously because there are things that they don't like about it and having been forced out of it and things like that. But yeah, there are people in exile and who have a kind of nostalgia, and but I think your case is quite unique, and that definitely came across. I think the comments I've got just have to do with like what you're going to do with this, because it's obviously such an amazing collection, but I bet someone's trying to hassle you to get to something out of this. So just the thoughts that occurred to me, I think it's important to at this point, it's hard because like you're in it, like, and you're in it life world, not just because you've been doing the work so hard. But I think it's important to try and just categorize the different levels that you have been working at, even though you've been all down at the level of the futures of Lebanon. So I think it seems to me that there are three levels. One is kind of literally, how do you ask people to think about the future of their country? And that's a kind of like service, like how do you do that? And you had those insights at the end, it seemed, that there's a mix of personal futures. It sort of gets messed up when you give people a timeline, which is one of the things that I've mentioned before, that I've discovered not to use times when doing visioning. So there's this question of like, how do you get people to think about the future of their country? And I think one of the other issues that you didn't mention so much is, you know, countries are weird scales to try and think at. Obviously, there is something remarkably, I'm presuming, consistent across possibly classes and types of people in Lebanon, about Lebanon. But many other places, obviously, the experience of the United Kingdom will totally depend on obviously class and racial background and education, wealth and all those kinds of things, where you are in England, you know, all these kinds of things. So there's this question. So this is one level, right? How do you get people to think about the future of their country? There's this other thing that you've been discovering, which is just how do you try to do workshopping in other languages? Like that's almost a meta frame that I think you've discovered, and it would be really important to just even register that you have some tools and tips and patterns that can be shared to just say, at the very least, Arabic affords different ways of workshopping because words have different tensions and resonances and are doing different things. It's not just that words are either translatable or not. It's literally that other languages can hold opposites together at the same time. So there's, how do you kind of get people to think about the futures of country, and when it's a kind of weird scale, how do you get people to do workshopping in different kind of languages? And then the last thing I heard you talking about, which again is a kind of meta frame, is something that I think is actually a lot in the work that's come out of Kees Dorst's work on frame creation, problem reframing. And it's not, he hasn't written about it, it's more Mieke van der Brouwer has written about it, and I think I gave some of her work last time. Problem framing as we teach it is all about identifying tensions. So it's the recognition that any particular problem, it's not just a problem. Invariably, it's a problem because someone is benefiting by the persistence of the problem. So there's always going to be this tension. It's only a problem for certain people, or it's a problem in a certain way, and they're kind of addicted to preserving the problem. Being able to think in opposites, being able to be in two states at one time, and being able to register that people are in two states at one time, this is also what you've discovered. And it is still something that the kind of stupid marketing legacy of service design is stuck on, which is apparently in a service journey, you can plot whether people are feeling positive or negative, because when they're feeling positive, they're only feeling positive apparently. Whereas in fact, no, everyone is always, I was in a terrible meeting today. I was clearly sort of grumpy. I was very concerned about the future of my discipline. And yet, because at that exact point, I felt like I was finally being eloquent about it. It subsequently proved that I was completely wrong. But at that particular moment, I was both incredibly pissed off and incredibly energized, thinking my anger is actually eloquent right now, and I'm going to convince them. I successfully alienated them completely, and the situation is a disaster. But at the time, just to give that example, I had two distinct emotions absolutely simultaneously. And that would be crucial to understand. Whenever you're doing a service failure and the customer is angry, it's true that the customer is enjoying being angry. And you have to let them have the pleasure of, it's a kind of Freudian moment. So that's a stupid example compared to the ones you were describing, but you have also been exploring people having two simultaneous emotions about a big thing like a country and its future and its past and all that kind of stuff. But I think there would also be a way to say that you've been researching something that draws really important insights for what it means to be a qualitative research-led service designer. And there's somebody who really pays attention to dual or three distinct emotions, atmospheres at any one time, and designs services that can handle the fact that people are multiple, not singular. So it seems to me those are the. If I was advising you and kind of saying, well, it's still a Masters of Service Design, you've got to pull something service designy out from it. It seems to me that you've got ways of having conversations about big things. You've got ways of dealing with these kind of oppositions, and you've got ways of negotiating sort of different languages. And it's not like you will just produce a card set that means I can now go and run a workshop in Arabic, obviously. So trying to find the story that you tell that would be meaning you're going to share your research so other service designers have an aha moment. And exactly as was the fourth thing you discovered, like how do you have a design for a workshop, but people actually have to design it themselves using their own equipment and artifacts and things. And it's almost like that should be your answer, that you are going to tell a bunch of people about researching the future of Lebanon in Arabic so that there are multiple states. And out of that, they will realize that they should run a workshop with Refugee Action Collective in the south of the UK and capture those same experiences. And if you've made an experience out of your research that allows them to then design differently, you've done a service design for them. You've been of service to them. So that would be my suggestion. I don't know if that's helpful, because it's just so rich and so much. You've just got to pick a few things and design them up now. I would actually discourage you from both of what you said at the end of where you want to go next, which is they struck me as too much still in the project, whereas you now have to do something of the project, if that makes sense. So I wouldn't keep going. I would now take stock and not toolify, but find ways of packaging some insights as, and you're now designing for service designers, you're not designing for teachers in Lebanon. Perhaps that's much of my suggestion. I might be completely wrong, and your advisors might suggest don't listen to me. Yeah.
I think originally I was hoping to have that. Like I was hoping that the ways of research would actually be of benefit to other people and it can inspire that. So that was in the back of my mind, like maybe that could be helpful. So I kind of see where you're going. However, I'm not like, yeah, it's a lot. It is a lot. I think I was also, there's still a lot of unpacking that's happening. So I don't think I even got to unpack all of it yet, which is,
Yeah,
which is
but
also
yeah, no. So again, if I had a better relationship with you that was more institutionally formal, now's the exact moment I would say, this is a really fantastic master's by research or PhD. Like you're well underway. Find a way of punctuating this research for this degree, punctuate it, park it, and then let's get going on a really interesting exploration of the stuff you've started now. But that's going to take 3 years. So yeah, I don't know if you want to do that, but that's what I would be saying to you if I was literally in the institution you were at. Like there is a lot here and it's really great stuff. And you're not going to pack it into this moment. So find some other train leaving the station that you can put it on and then just pack your bag over here.
I think that is very helpful of like focusing. I think it's very easy to diverge, especially when, as you mentioned, thinking of a whole scale of a country, and then trying to find what next, basically.
Yeah, but it's the same thing as you kind of said, like, why would people come back or anything like that? It's not focus, meaning you're going to leave stuff on the floor and it's going to be swept up in the bin. Precisely, it's about parking it somewhere to come back to. So it's almost like the question, like if you're in a service design project and you do this research and you discover 10 things that need to be service designed, the client's only going to want you to design one. And it'd be terrible just to leave the other 9 and think, well, that was great, but no one's ever going to do that. No, now say, right, I'm going to work out how to do the other 9 now, because we've got to start on that. So you focus by knowing you're going to have something else to go back to.
I think just to kind of comment as well on the terms of temporality, which you were mentioning when we were visioning, I think that was also something. So in the line of question, the first question was kind of remove the time, and I'm like, future of. And then I asked them like, okay, what was the time frame you thought of? And then I would ask like, okay, future of Lebanon 2050. And that showed a very different, sometimes different mindset. So some people were like, oh, well, in 3 years, things are not going to change. But when I asked the question of 2050, one of the participants who I know was like, thank you for asking, not thank you, but like that was, oh, okay, things are going to change. Now I'm just thinking this way, but in 20 years, that's going to look different. For some, it just felt like, well, we're going to have 10 years, but then we're going to fall again. So it was and that was the insight that led to something else. So that was a very interesting thing when we remove time and just talk about future in a context. What does that look like when we say future without a context? What are people thinking? And then all of those. So it was a really interesting exercise to be doing.
Oh, great. That's interesting to hear. Yeah.
Right. And on that note, we unfortunately are out of time. So firstly, I would like to really thank Dorcas, Damien, and Sarah for the presentations. They were amazing, and thank you very much for the courage and the well-structured everything. And as always, these are deeply, deeply interesting. So before we wrap the session, Cameron, do you have any kind of big closing words?
No, that's always a dangerous thing to say. So as always, thank you. Secondly, yeah, that suggestion just with Sarah then, just for all of you, you've all done incredible work, and there's like a prosaic thing you have to do. And I find for my own self, I can only motivate to do the smaller thing by knowing I have the things that I've left behind that I really felt about. I can come back to them. I've got some other way of doing them. So that's the only way I ever get to do that. So it feels like you all might be at that stage. And my only other comment about all of them is yeah, just always pay attention to that kind of meta level. You're in the project, but you're also like a service designer helping design service design. And if you can just notice that bit up there. It'll also tell you what to design now and how to kind of communicate it and the way to kind of present it, particularly to the people you're going to have to present it to in 6 weeks' time. But yeah, good luck. And as I say, just use me as much as you like. Just email me things and I'll try to get back to you. And if I don't get back to you, just email me again and just write WTF in the subject line, and then I will get back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so very, very much. We're going to close the session now. There's going to be a traditional debrief in 15 minutes. So it's going to be at 10 to 12. And I will see some of you here. And thank you very, very much to Cameron. And we'll see you probably in a couple of months at this stage.
Yeah, please look forward to it. All right. See you.
I'm going to stop recording now.